Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks, where we meet with the top thought leaders and strategists in emerging technologies, digital assets, a regulatory landscape, and capital markets. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, and joining me for Cybersecurity Awareness Month is Nick Puetz, Managing Director of Security and Privacy at Protiviti, and Tim Zeilman, Vice President and Global Product Owner of Cyber HSB. We're here to discuss the top technology risks organizations face and why they must ensure that their tech stacks are not only efficient, but resilient. Gentlemen, it's great to have the both of you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks. Let's kick off with a quick introduction. Tim, explain to us where you sit within the cyber ecosystem.
Yeah. So thank you, Jill. I'm on the cyber insurance side. So I am the head of cyber at HSB, a specialty insurer that focuses on small to medium-sized companies. We're part of the larger Munich Re organization.
And Nick, tell us more about the work you're doing at Protiviti.
Yeah, thanks, Jill. So I run our cyber strategy practice. We're spending time with security leaders to help them kind of build, plan, and run and operationalize their cybersecurity strategies and programs.
And Nick, when you think about the current landscape when it comes to cyber today, because of course, good actors, bad actors are leveraging a lot of the same types of technology, what are some of the trends that stand out the most to you when it comes to the cyber threat landscape?
Yeah, so some of the trends that we're seeing are, everyone continues to be concerned about the ransomware threat that's out there, and that, when you start pulling the thread on that, really encompasses the entirety of a cybersecurity program. When you think about, the defense posture and the response capability that it takes to defend against that, I think we've talked a lot about that. Where else we're also seeing time and emphasis being spent is on the cyber quantification side. We're seeing a lot of regulatory activity that's driving quantification and the more of a risk-driven type of approach. And then certainly organizations that are really looking out, kind of into the future. We're seeing a lot of, what could happen with AI and with the quantum realm. I think we're maybe a little ways away from seeing a lot of that widespread, but it is something that we need to prepare for and really start to think about.
Tim, tell us more about the cyber insurance space. Is it something similar to, let's call it auto home insurance, where you have to have it, but you hope you never have to use it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good way to look at it. It is not as nearly as widely purchased. It's still a relatively young insurance products have been around 15, 20 years. Not quite as widely purchased as it is as something like auto, but absolutely should be. Basically the risk that cyber insurance is trying to cover is reliance on computer systems, digital technologies, things that every business really of any size relies on today. And it protects you against the kinds of disruptions that you might experience through a malicious attack, through a data breach, through a ransomware attack, and even things like the recent CrowdStrike attack that we saw, where there's a failure, not necessarily malicious, but it takes down computer systems, interrupts your ability to do business. So it covers those sorts of first-party coverages. You might liken it a bit to property insurance, but it's covering non-tangible damage. It's not covering fire. It's not covering water. It's covering harm to digital assets. And there's typically a liability component as well. So if you get involved in a lawsuit over any of these things, data breaches, computer attacks, things like that, cyber insurance will typically pick up that sort of thing as well.
Yeah, and Nick, Tim brought up a good point that this covers so many different areas of the company, and the tech stacks are only just getting bigger and bigger across enterprise, which of course opens the enterprise up to vulnerabilities, especially when you're working with multiple vendors, different suppliers, third-party systems and so forth. How do you pick the right technology mix? Is it quantity versus quality? What are your recommendations there?
Yeah, so for me, it needs to start off with kind of the risk-driven equation, and what are the things that you're trying to defend against as an organization. From there's always going to be a regulatory element that can play into that technology mix. What I would also add is that I think it's extremely important to take an architectural mindset, and what I mean by that is over the last, call it 15 years, we've seen organizations amass just large quantities of technology that have gone unimplemented or underimplemented, and so it creates a lot of challenge, a lot of waste. And so we're seeing a lot of organizations that are looking up and down their technology stack, and they're trying to rationalize that down and really be thoughtful about kind of the best of breed versus best of platform approach. But when you really come, especially when it's linked to cyber insurance and being insurable, or taking premiums in a positive direction, there's a lot of basics in there. Are we protecting our admin accounts through privileged access management? Do we have good security operations processes and good response processes? Are we covering, if we're kind of transforming and moving to the cloud, are we covering that new posture? And then certainly what's happening at the endpoint from an endpoint detection and response perspective. Those are also the playgrounds in which we're seeing point products turn into more platform types of products with multiple capabilities coming under one logo.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, go ahead, Tim.
yeah, great points. If I could just chime in a little bit, we at HSB mostly deal with small and medium-sized businesses, and for those kinds of, I think Nick's points are fantastic. For those kinds of businesses, it's often the most important decision that a business makes is who they're going to rely on as a third-party partner. Often companies of this size have little to no internal IT staff, certainly very little dedicated internal IT security staff. And so they're going to be relying on third parties. And the choice of who they're going to partner with is an extremely important one, because often it's the third-party advisors that will make those sorts of decisions that Nick is talking about.
Yeah. And Tim, that's got to align to the complexity of how you rationalize your IT infrastructure, right? When you have multiple competing business lines, I realize with small and medium-sized businesses, they might not have as many verticals as, let's say, enterprise, but when you have to pick and choose your tech stack because you have your product lines, your revenue lines, you're also thinking about customer experience, user experience, and so forth, while insurance perhaps may be in the background to, an earlier point about quantifying and brand reputation, these intangible things that are associated with a company, there really is no dollar amount on that. So from an insurance perspective, how do you value that? How much should a company have? Is it standardized, or is it based on a sum of a parts or some other type of analysis?
Yeah, no, there's really no magic formula for it. A lot of this begins really with an understanding of your business. So, what do you do? What are your priorities? You mentioned, security is a priority, but user experience, efficiency of getting work done, also very high experiences. And it's all about making choices and allocating resources among those things, and understanding your business. Kind of, what kind of assets do you have that a malicious actor might be interested in? What kind of information do you have? What kind of digital assets do you have? Who might be interested in attacking you? So understanding your business, understanding your security that's in place, and then making tough decisions. It's an obvious statement, but no business has unlimited resources. So it's a matter of understanding what you need to protect, and then making smart decisions as best you can about how to spend your limited resources in protecting those assets, including things like cyber insurance, to pick up that sort of residual security piece that you just you're not going to be able to cover everything. There's always going to be something uncovered, and that cyber insurance is intended to cover kind of that residual piece that at the end of the day might slip between the cracks, even though you're doing the best you can with security.
And Jill, I would add to that, that's where we're seeing a big pickup in risk management and risk quantification. Is it's helping with that. Where do I focus? Where do I prioritize? And it's also, risk is the language that a lot of the insurance providers, it's a common language. And so we're seeing a bridge that's trying to be built between, what should we do and what can we do? And it seems to be benefiting right now, but we've got a ways to go before everyone is really talking that common language.
Yeah. And, it's interesting because sometimes companies tend to get in silos, right? Where you're thinking about your own line or your own risk management, depending on what vertical you sit in. So when you think about the role of the CISO, right, we're seeing more cybersecurity experts on the boards being able to communicate as the CISO, as, leadership within the tech area of the company. How do you communicate these needs? Because there's always going to be competing priorities when it comes to return on investment. Nick, you had made the point earlier that sometimes, money is just thrown into different areas of tech and then there's nothing ever happens with it. So how do you effectively communicate this with the board, with your, the CFO function and other risk areas of the company?
Yeah, so I can take a stab at that. There's a few things to keep in mind there. One, how does your audience consume information? Like, what's an effective way to communicate with these folks? Not all boards are created equal. Some like more detail, some want a little less detail. I think it's important that whatever the message is, I talk about being consistent and persistent with the message. We can't go in with different messages every time we go and talk to the board. We also want to make sure that we're extremely succinct in our messaging. And there's three lenses that we're typically starting with when we're looking to create that narrative. What's our regulatory footprint looks like? What does our risk posture and our risk appetite look like? And then where are we in those few opportunities able to actually add value to the business and be a kind of a business enabler, a business driver, and not just a risk mitigation or compliance type of function. So those are some of the places that we're seeing board conversations move towards. And those are the topics that we're trying to establish with the clients that we're working with on a continual basis.
Yeah, and Nick, I would imagine, especially over the past couple of years, not that AI is anything new to enterprise, but because Gen AI has entered the consumer vernacular, and every company's trying to associate itself with that story, whether it's internal applications within the enterprise or external client-facing applications. And if there is a rush to get to the market and get product out there, how challenging has that made it for cyber professionals? Because it takes time to test these and figure out where the vulnerabilities are and what type of data is being put in and out, and how even internal operations are associating from senior leadership all the way through the company, how they're working with these new types of tools.
Yeah, that's accurate. What we're seeing is a lot of emphasis on governance, and we're seeing this just in general from all the kind of the newer regulations. There is an emphasis on governance and an emphasis on risk management. And when we think about AI, I like to compare it to like things that have happened in the past. So I think about when companies first went out onto the internet. Once we figured out that there were bad things out on the internet, we started to build up walls. We said, no, you can't go out to the internet. And so we continued to kind of play that cat and mouse game where how do I get back out to the internet? How am I enabling the business through that? And so AI, I feel like organizations are trying to be a little bit more constructive, knowing that it's already out there, it's already being used, and there are shareholder expectations, leadership expectations that this is going to be something that we need to leverage to either create an advantage, to create new products, whatever it is. So how do we think about governing this and being a secure steward of it, not shutting it off like we did with some of the kind of early internet days? So a lot of emphasis and focus on governance, and I would say at a more tactical level, understanding your use cases. Where do we start with how we're going to leverage AI? Is it for our own consumption? Are we creating it for someone else to consume, or anything in between? We've got to be extremely thoughtful about use cases, and then we can be thoughtful about governance and controls that come with that.
Well, I think that's a great way to look at it, right? Rather than just, throwing resources towards the tech stack, what problem are you looking to solve, right? And I think that makes it a little bit easier for companies to figure out how this allocation is going to look. Tim, you kept bringing up digital assets and data before, right? So is it necessarily, it's not ransom as much, and it's more on targeting the data itself?
There's a lot to it, and I would say certainly in understanding how you need to allocate your cybersecurity resources, understanding what you have in terms of data and digital assets and architecture is all very important. In terms of kind of what we're seeing in terms of loss events and claims, it's really ransomware and various forms of fraud. So it's been fairly stable for the last couple of years. Ransomware is definitely the leading driver, but ransomware has become more sophisticated over time. So it's not just encryption of data, going in, finding and exfiltrating sensitive data, whether it's personal data or confidential corporate data, has become a big part of modern ransomware, and the ability of bad actors to get as much leverage as they can over their victims. So it's become a multifaceted sort of event, and the protection of personal information and knowing what you have in terms of personal or confidential information is a big part of it. So less and less of what we saw maybe 10 years ago, where the threat actors would come in and their primary goal would be to steal and then sell on the dark web large amounts of credit card information or social security numbers, things like that. More today, trying to use that information as leverage to get ransoms paid.
Nick, when we think about the outlook here, it feels like it's a cat and mouse game. One step forward, two steps back. Is progress being made? As regulatory frameworks are developed and so forth, I'm sure that's going to help make those kinds of decisions. But are we winning on the good actor side?
Progress is being made. Winning, I think, is a tougher way to describe it, candidly. There's still some very fundamental challenges that we face. A question I like to ask a lot of the security executives that I'm working with is kind of, if you had that magic wand, what would you make, go away? And inevitably, the two answers that I get probably 9 out of 10 times is make my old technology go away, because the systemic risk within our technology environments to connect really old things to really new things is creating a tremendous amount of risk out there. And then secondly, make my passwords go away. And because at the end of the day, there's a tremendous amount of adversarial activity that is still kind of password based. I'm getting credentials to an account. I'm using that account to move around the environment, to bring in the bad stuff that I'm going to use to ransom or to conduct a scenario. And those are very basic kind of day one things that we've been talking about for decades now, and we still can't get past them. So are we making progress? Yes, but we're still facing an extreme uphill challenge with the very fundamentals and basics that are leading to a lot of the challenges around breaches and incidents.
Yeah. So it sounds
And
like
I think you mentioned the cat and mouse nature of this. I think that's just inevitable. I can't really ever see that going away. It's always going to be kind of an arms race between the good guys and the bad guys. You mentioned AI earlier. That's kind of one of the latest battlegrounds in this cat and mouse game is the AI race on both sides. And I don't think either side is getting the advantage, but each side is trying to up its game using the latest technologies to, at the very least, perpetrate that sort of stalemate.
All right. Appreciate both of your insights. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.